Greetings! Welcome to the Devlog for hot dogs, horseshoes, and hand grenades. We're going to start off as always with a quick sound check. Make sure your speakers aren't up too high. Wonderful. So what have we got for you this week? Well, we've got a little bit of a preview of a new scene that I'm working on that's going to be fulfilling multiple purposes. As I mentioned last week, there's not going to be an alpha today, and that's because I am hard at work working on a scene for us to take to GDC. We're going to be showing off the game in Valve's VR section, and I realized along the process that I didn't have a scene in the game that both was a sort of good environment to show off a wide range of the game's firearms and objects, could be navigated really easily, had a bunch of different sorts of distance aspects, and contained a bit of the game's sort of kooky sense of humor. And so the idea behind this scene was born. It's still very much in progress. This isn't even the latest version of it. It's just the version that I can run smoothly at the moment. But basically what it's going to be called Sampler Planner, and it's going to have a series of stations that are the sort of different berm ranges designed for different sets of objects in the game that slowly step up the complexity of what you're going to be dealing with. There's going to be a section for throwing, a section for handguns, a section for SMG and shotguns, rifles, and then the end, which is all of the most fun toys in the game. But I realized along the way, especially after a bunch of user requests, that the need, which was having a demoable scene for GDC and anywhere else where we want to show the game, lined up perfectly with a need that many of you who play the game and say want to show it off to friends have, which is a nice single scene that you can drop someone into and they can learn rapidly how the game functions, and while at the same time getting to some of the fun toys really rapidly, especially if you're showing it to a bunch of friends at once. And so while this is initially being developed for GDC, it's then going to get another sort of polish, content, and expansion pass and actually be integrated into the game proper. It's not really an explicit tutorialization in that it's not going to have like floating things pointing exactly to what you're going to do. It's still a little self-directed, but I think will fill a gap that is really needed for the game. So let's just take a little walk around it. Let me go ahead and grab something else. I'm going to grab one of these because it's just funny to me to affix a wooden stock to a deagle. Oh, also, and this won't be till the next alpha, but I totally just for funsies put an oversized suppressor mount on the deagle so that you can make this abomination. So let's take ourselves a little walk here. Going with my arm swinger here. So yeah, as I said, there's going to be several stations. This is where the first one's going to be. They're not filled in yet. As I said, this is a slightly older version of this scene. But yeah, we're going to have sort of a map and some areas where you're going to sort of be introduced to what objects are present and relevant for this given station. A quick way to warp between them, so for people who aren't yet really familiar with locomotion or still getting their VR legs, you'll be able to jump from station to station to station. So if you want to use no artificial locomotion at all, you'll be able to do that, which I know is really important for people demoing to VR for the first time, and they're still sort of overwhelmed and getting acclimated. And then there's going to be a whole bunch of other little Easter eggs and hidden things for folks who actually want to go around and explore the scene more. You'll notice the surround on it looks a little familiar, and that's because I've basically stolen and modified the distance surround that we have in the Arizona range, but then tweaked the lighting and the exact setup and proximity of things. We're actually standing on a giant horseshoe here for the station layout, and up here is actually going to be the sort of primary structure, which will make more sense when we when all of the fun and goofy and sort of narrative sides of this are filled in. Suffice to say that this installation is built narratively by the same company that brought us Worst World, so it will have some of the same goofy humor in it. Let's blow up a barrel. Oh, Are we even loaded? There we go. So yeah, coming on over here. Arm swinger skiing. So yeah, so that's station 1, 2, 3, 4. We've got 100-meter. One that's going in here for rifles, which will be useful for people who just want a sort of classic berm range. I'm also going to be placing targets up on the mountains there, marked for distance. They'll probably be able to be like a 300, a 4, a 5, and a 600-meter range target for those of you who really love bipod shooting and seeing just how far away you can hit. This is going to be our crazy toy setup where we'll have the minigun and the rocket launcher and the Gatling gun and a couple other fun things. So yeah, so I thought I would just give you a little preview. Obviously, it's not a ton to look at right now because it's not full. It's not filled in with a good chunk of its content and all the targets. But I thought I would give you this little preview to know that you'll be getting a new scene, and I hope to actually drop, even if it's not 100% done. This will be coming with update 52, along with all of the sort of sound updates and the weapon system rebuilds and such. So yeah, so let's go ahead and jump out of VR now. There's actually a couple different topics I wanted to cover today beyond what is in this demo scene.
Yo! So we're out of VR. So yeah, as I said, finally actually taking H3 on the road a little bit to show something at GDC. I am tremendously nervous about it, but at the same time, it's exciting to do so. And what makes demoing it even cooler, which is this perfect segue into our second topic today, is that it'll be demoed using a Vive Pro, which means I actually have one sitting right here. Look at that beautiful. I'm so glad they went with blue. I love blue so much. All the shades of it. Except pure turquoise. Screw pure turquoise. Anyway, so yeah, so let's take a look at this sucker. I'm sure many of you have seen pictures of it, but here it is in the plastic. I've been playing around with it now for a couple days. I have some opinions on it yet. On it so far. I'm gonna actually start with what I dislike about it, just because it's a shorter list, and I like to end on a positive note. I know you know at this point that I'm a straight shooter with this sort of stuff. I'm not a fanboy when it comes to devices, and am usually the first to shout from the hills if I quite dislike something. So the things that I find suboptimal about this, first a personal one, and I know this is super subjective and not very high up on a lot of folks' lists, is I'm not a fan of these headphones. The mounting structure of them is awesome. The way that this actually works, that these can flip out, that they can come up and down. I just think the actual drivers in them are kind of unimpressive, especially compared to what I'm used to listening to. They're biased towards the high range. They're a little sharp for my taste. Not a very, very good bass response. And granted, that's a function of pretty much anything that isn't an over-ear headphone. It's just one of those types of things that I'm an over-ear headphone, where I would actually rather listen to something coming out of speakers so that the sound is filling the room around me. But thankfully, they are removable. You can actually pull back this little Velcro strap and you can unscrew them out, and it actually comes with some plastic caps to cover this up for people who wish to use their own headphones with it. I know I will be, even though it'll make it less convenient to put on and take off and things like that. But for me, sound is the most important thing. I really do hope that HTC has the vision or the interest, or that this would even be cost feasible for them, especially considering how modular this setup is, to eventually sell a better over-ear set of headphones to mount into this. Because I think, and my feelings in this regard are just as much with the Rift as well. I hate those headphones. Not impressed by them. Don't like the range, whether it's ear beads or the headphones. I'm quite pissy about it. For those who are curious, by the way, this is what I rock. I actually have like 3 sets of these in a box just in case they eventually stop selling them. They're NVX XPT 100s. It's a Brainwaves clone. They're like the most comfortable things on the planet. And if you like to VR in headphones and don't mind the extra pain in the ass of getting your cords set up, get these. I'll have a link to them in the description. I love them to pieces. Anyway, moving on with this, the other downside with the Pro, and I don't know whether this is a function of the fact that the screen is brighter, because it does feel brighter compared to my Pre back there. I don't know if that's just because my Pre is now over 2 years old and the screen is dimming. I don't know if these types of screens actually dim over time. But the screen is brighter, which means that the optical properties of flaring as a result of the lenses in here felt a little more pronounced. And once again, I need to spend more time with it to understand if it's just a brightness function, if it's because things are sharper in the screen, the flaring itself is sharper or something along those lines. But I did notice it. It was more pronounced in, say, the indoor range in H3 when you're looking up at the fluorescent lights. But then again, I do have those a little too bright in the first place. So it's I need more time with it to really feel, to see if I just end up getting used to it like I did with the Vive Pre. But it was different enough that I did notice it. So yeah, so that's basically, those are my entire complaints with it. Moving on to the stuff I love, just the overall ergonomics of this are so much better. I've had to switch back to the regular Vive Pre just because of the speed of this older computer and recording and things like that, and it's so much more of a pain in the ass to get the old one on. This rotates up, so it's much easier, especially like me. I have long hair that tends to get caught in straps when they're on their own, and the ability to just put it on like this and pull it down. It's got this screw in the back that allows you to loosen this 100% of the way up, so you can sort of get it situated in back, tighten it to exactly your desired tightness for comfort, which means it's way easier to get it like centered and perched on the cheeks exactly how you want. And as a result, it has better forward to back weight ratio, even though, you know, this strap adds some weight to the overall headset because it feels balanced. The other folks that I've had put it on are like, is this lighter? And even though I think it's actually a couple ounces heavier, it perceptually feels lighter. So yeah, just a great build quality overall with it. Yeah, and then obviously the part I'm sure most of you want to know, what about the screen? Well, the resolution bump is I don't know what the exact percentage is, but it feels significant. And the way in which I experienced the significance of it was in several categories. Text becomes way more legible, especially, weirdly enough, in terms of text that lives in a texture instead of a GUI, because it's being filtered differently. And so all of the fun little narrative signs that exist in like Worst World and things like that, the gun instruction signs, were way easier to read in it. The second thing is that what I would call the perceptual midfield is sharper, and that's what I would call like about 3 meters out to about 15 meters. And the result of this is that all of the objects that exist in that field feel like they pop more. I'm more aware of their distance from me, and they feel more solid as a result of the increased sharpness. It was really fun to, especially when you're arm swinging through a scene and you're feeling an object come towards you and pass you, the object just feels way more 3D, if that makes sense. So, which I of course loved. And of course the important thing, iron sight clarity is increased. Obviously it's still, if you're holding a very thin iron sight all the way out here, you're still butting up very close to the panel limit. But I did almost immediately a Gunnasium run with a number of handguns, because you're sort of, you're moving your head and your arms around. And I found myself hitting my targets way more frequently, way more effortlessly, because the ambiguity of where your front and back posts were lining up was significantly reduced. So I think for those of you, obviously when we're looking at something like this, that is a mid-generation upgrade, right? This is not a Vive 2, it's a Vive Pro. It's an extension on top of the sort of current gen with more resolution, better ergonomics. The question is like, who is this going to really benefit? For whom is it going to be the thing that they want, that they're just going to run out and immediately buy when it is available? In my opinion, I think. And before I get to that sort of summation, the other important part is performance. What do you need to drive this? In this machine, I've got an older Titan X. I always forget which one came first, Maxwell or Pascal. I think Maxwell is the older one. I have that. This machine's like 2.5, almost 3 years old. And so I was able to run on high, which is the mode in H3 where MSAA is cranked way up, shadows are cranked way up. I was able to run pretty much every scene except for Friendly 45 and a couple instances of Worst World without reprojection ever kicking in at all. In Worst World and Friendly 45, when you do things like add a scope or just have a ton of stuff on screen, I was dipping down to 45, but if I knocked that quality setting down to strip out the shadows, it still ran like a dream. So I would definitely say that for those of you who have a punchy card, something in the like 980 Ti and up sort of thing in terms of power, you're going to definitely be able to drive this without having to knock your quality settings in the game down. And personally, just being an enthusiast, like especially if you've got like a 1080 Ti or one of those types of people that has the rig where you're like, nah, I crank super sampling up. This is, if you can afford it, a no-brainer, because you'll get more perceptual benefit, obviously, of a higher panel density than cranking your super sampling up, because there's actually more to deliver to you in that way. So yeah, so that's what I would generally say. I mean, if I were in the enthusiast camp and I played VR shooters, especially if I liked iron sights, I would not want to wait until whatever the next generation happens, especially seeing as I've beaten the hell out of my pre. I would probably go ahead and jump on this. Once again, I don't want to make anyone feel bad who VR is a major expense for them and they're like, oh, I gotta already get the new thing. This is still very much in the category of a luxury, but it's a fine luxury, I've got to say. So, Vive Pro segment over. Let's put you over there for now. The last thing that I wanted to talk about, and for those of you who don't want to listen to something about the politics of games, just go ahead and be like, oh, that was a very nice devlog, and just hit that stop button or hit that close button and carry on with your day. Because I'm going to be talking about a political topic now, which intersects our medium, our industry, and the genre of game that H3 is in. And so I wanted to bring it up because it's something that I've been engaged in just a ton of conversations with folk over the past couple days. So there are two things that have happened this past week. One related to gaming at large and one related to VR in particular that are interconnected that I want to speak to. I'm going to take my time with this because I don't want to whip anyone up into a frenzy, which happens altogether too much with hot button issues in gaming. But I still think it's worth sort of pulling apart and examining. So earlier this week, there was a CNN op-ed written by Professor Jeremy Bailenson at Stanford VR, titled, "If a Possible Mass Shooter Wants to Hone His Craft, Don't Give Him a Virtual Boot Camp." So just to start off, just because it's important when talking about these things, I think it's important to be forthcoming from the get-go if one is defensive about a topic. Being like, I felt defensive about this from the get-go. And I certainly did. That title is designed to provoke. in a particular way. And it was difficult for me to also engage with the piece as I started to read it, both due to the title and the fact that his second paragraph begins with a statement: video games have one mandate, to be fun, that shows such a fundamental misunderstanding of what games are that I was like, oh, crap. But that little nugget is an ontological cluster truck of its own. We won't deal with that here. But let's jump right to he delivers sort of the core of his argument almost immediately, which I think is to be the way that it's utilized in this piece is to be charitable, a bit of a mess. Virtual reality is the ultimate training machine, is where he jumps in. He talks about that when we're comparing something like a VR game to a pancake game, that it's the engagement of the body, the fact that we are having a less abstracted interaction with something, repetitive body movements, that make the experience and what we possibly learn in that experience to be more impactful and useful. He brings up that the military has been using virtual reality to train soldiers for decades, which it has. But where I take issue is in regards to that, what exactly has VR been being used for precisely? And how is it relevant to, or not relevant to, the implied thought experiment of the entire piece, which is this notion that we could have someone who has a firearm who might engage in a heinous act like a mass shooting, and that they have learned to do that effectively in VR, or that VR, being this new medium that is so effective at training people in these circumstances, could accidentally train that person, and we should be sort of worried about that. And this is one of those ways where I think a combination of lack of certain specific literacies and the fact that, let's be honest, this is an industry, this is a tech medium, which means that it is oversold at every, it's full of puffery. This is the case with games and game consoles. This is the case with VR. This is always the case with the next big new thing. And so when I see an article like this that is going to be read most often by lay people who might not know what VR can do, what it can't do, what it might be able to do, and what it probably won't be able to do, and can't make those differentiations, and who might not have any real-world firearms experience, would draw some incorrect conclusions about it. And that's where what I wanted to talk about. He's right to say, Balanson, that the military has been using virtual reality for a long time. In most of those cases, it's being used successfully for constructing complex situations that would otherwise be difficult or cumbersome to play act. But for consistency, many of the things when I was studying this prior to our current HMD era were situations where, like, an officer arrives on a scene and there's several soldiers, friendlies, and a vehicle, and someone's crying over there, and they're speaking in a language they don't understand, and something's on fire over there. How do they handle the situation? It's great for situational modeling where you can extract data out of it. I would submit that something that VR is absolutely atrocious at, even with the sort of latest toys, and some of the folks that sell those latest toys might be angry at me for saying this, is firearms training. It's not only incapable of doing it well, but is likely possibly even doing damage in the effort to train with that. If we examine what it is, what are the combination of skill sets that are necessary to operate a firearm, not just abstract information like I can name the parts and this is the sequence of things that you need to do to ready it, which you can learn from YouTube or a documentary or a manual, but the actual in-body usage of it, the ability to use a firearm with intent, are almost a list of things that VR is terrible at. One of the most important, if not the most important, elements of this has to do with sight picture. Those of you who play H3 and fire guns in real life already know this, that because we have this sort of fixed focal plane on a headset, no sight looks in VR like it does in real life. Everything is in, every single focal plane is in focus, and this while in certain cases it makes it easier to hit things, i.e. our front and our back post on on say a handgun are always all in focus. A diopter sight doesn't work correctly at all because one part is actually not fuzzing, allowing you to focus on the front sight. So, and this is a limitation of the fact that we have a fixed panel at a fixed distance. It's a limitation of rasterization of a scene, and the fact that drawing, many focal planes at their correct focus in depth of field is so far past what is performance tenable at the moment to be laughable. I honestly don't even think it's one of those in the next decade it's going to happen sort of things for consumer kit, given just the volume of data and rendering required. And it's something early on in H3. Within, I think, the first year, we actually got contacted by a company that does optics attachments for firearms, reflex sights and the like, wanting to put their stuff into H3. And before even getting to the point, the sort of the ethics of I didn't want to rep a company's specific products in the game, I sort of brought up that I think it's fundamentally unethical to even do so because the medium is incapable of representing the product accurately because of those sort of limitations of optics. So if there's a thing that is absolutely critical that you be able to do correctly to utilize a real firearm, VR just can't do. That it's not just incapable of representing. If you're using it to train that skill set, you are mistraining an individual. You are preparing them for a situation that does not exist. Step 2 with this is body mechanics of using an actual firearm. And this is the part that VR is actually closest to being able to replicate. There are, I think there's a VR 15 controller that sort of tries to replicate an actual rifle for usage. But even so, you're not cycling live rounds. You're not getting the critical aspects of of what actual recoil impulse is. I've played with a couple of these facsimiles, and they don't feel like firing. They're the closest we've ever gotten to as though you're firing a real rifle, but it isn't the same. And of course, you're wearing a big HMD, so you're not truly seeing exactly where your fingers are and everything like that. So it's further away than most people want to admit and consider. And then most importantly, the single most important part of learning to operate a firearm adeptly is the sensory inuring to an explosion occurring 6 inches from your face over and over and over again with like 140 to 160 decibel sound pressure. The sort of thing, and many of you have experienced the first time you've shot a gun, that gives you that adrenaline rush that sort of like you lock up and you forget everything you were doing because something very, very loud just happened. This VR, in terms of firearm training, VR is capable of delivering only the most superficial of benefit in that regard. And I say this as someone who works on these things, who strives for a certain verisimilitude when it's enjoyable. The point that I always sort of that I've brought up a bunch the past couple weeks, and those of you who've seen me go to, over to Battlefield Vegas can see it right there, is like I've spent every day in this for 2 years. In the most accurate consumer VR firearm simulator. And I suck at shooting real firearms because I don't get the range time in. All of the firing ranges around me here are inconvenient, or they're tourist death traps, and I don't have enough time because I'm always working. I don't have the physical reps. And my constant hours and hours for everyday experience in VR does not make up for that. Not at all. I'm downright embarrassingly bad at firing a real firearm, and there's evidence on this channel to show it. So this is the way in which, to bring this back up to a high level, this is where I think the argument that Bailenson is making about the efficacy of VR training, that a bunch of things are being intentionally conflated to talk about. There's this sort of like, is little Billy gonna learn how to use a gun well in VR? No, he's not. It's not gonna do that for him. It might increase his reflex time in a generalized way, in the way that playing table tennis would. But he's gonna get more of a benefit playing at an airsoft field with his buddies, because he'll be holding an actual thing, moving through real physical space, dealing with multiple focal planes, luminance changes between how bright the sun is and the inside of a room is. I don't see the op-eds about we shouldn't be sending 14-year-olds to airsoft boot camps to prepare them. So I think this is one of those ways in which the capabilities of the medium are being implicitly blown out of proportion in their current state. And that's not to say someday this may be, we can only predict where technology is going. But in its current state, I just have to raise my eyebrow. And the reason that I do so to this degree is that second thing that's happened this week, which is that our president here has recently chosen as his latest sort of scandal distraction technique to throw the entire games industry under the bus in answering the horribly difficult question of why do we have so many kids shooting each other's in school, and how can we stop this, and like what role can the state play to trying to deal with this situation. And with seemingly no information at all, and a bit hypocritically for a man who's documented as exposing his young children to exceedingly violent media, and fast forwarding to the violent parts of it, has rounded up a bunch of people in the games industry to have a non-event in it. And that's what I think was frustrating for me, is that right while we're having this moment where a discussion that was pretty well put to bed is being drummed back up as just a distraction technique that nothing will come from. Here we have an individual, up at a position of prominence within VR, effectively jumping on with this sort of line and throwing everyone who makes an action VR game sort of under the bus, sort of placing the blame it's placing a sort of future blame of like, if this happens and that person played VR games, it's the VR game's fault. It's not the like this kid somehow has access to unrestricted and knows how to use a real firearm, which he did not learn from VR kind of thing. And so it incenses me, and I can't help but feel that a component of the push behind this op-ed is Mr. Bailenson is, I believe, a co-founder or financially engaged with a VR training company. It is very much in his interest for us to all feel as though VR is the super technology for training, and not look too closely at what it can do and what it can't, and what it actually does only marginally better than systems of training and processes that have been in place for decades to centuries. The sort of bookend to my own experience talking with, I've fielded questions over the past 2 years working on H3 from so many prospective clients wanting to know if H3 could be migrated over into being useful to train for lots of things. And more often than not, they're interested in the firearm training because that's what it represents to a great detail. But any examination of what it does well and doesn't, and the costs of it, just how much money it costs to make something in a customized way, show it to be like, no, just send people out for range time. That's effective. It's cost effective. That's what actually works. This is still primarily recreation. So yeah, so that's where all, because obviously there's so many more little details that I could get into in regards to this, but I had to say something because I just, how to put it, it's not to say that there aren't elements of the thrust of his piece that I can totally understand. One of the suggestions that he puts forth is a sort of content restriction that we chose to adopt in putting H3 together, which is that there aren't human targets in it. Now, I made that decision not on some sort of worry that it's gonna make people better shooting at people, but because of the fact that first and foremost, this is an experience that's meant to be relaxing and is meant to be about representing sport shooting and the joy of collecting firearms and customizing them and blowing watermelons up. Not something that's about aggressive military simulation or picking a random country around the world and turning them into a bogeyman from a cultural standpoint, like so many games do. That's just not my jam, and it's not what I want to be making. So I can understand the perspective of going, let's at least be critically aware about what we're making. But I definitely think that there's rooting it in the medium per se, instead of rooting it in the same way that we always have looked at individual instances of media and gone, does this cross the line? Is this saying something that's really wretched or isn't? And I think that will continue to be the way that we should approach this, instead of making sort of bizarre medium-specific arguments that are predicated on misunderstandings of what it can do and pie-in-the-sky fantasies of what it might one day do. So yeah, so I will end my little screed there at that. I hope it was interesting to you, and it's something that I'm sure we'll continue to deal with. I'll be frank, it's throughout the entire time working on this, these are issues I think about constantly, because I am concerned about what the game says, and I am concerned. I know a lot of people who come to the game at first don't exactly know how to read it and read me and read where I sit and we sit as a group politically in regards to it. And so understanding that and communicating it well is of prime importance to me, which is why I wanted to bring this all up. But yeah, and also just to end, it's something that I continue to be willing to talk out. It's an interesting topic space. So if it's something that you do want to engage with, obviously I'm posting this to Reddit on H3. I'd rather all of it be in one place so it's easier to keep track of, but I'd be happy to continue to talk it out with any of you who find this an interesting topic space. It is far from settled. So, well, with that, I'm going to jump back to feverishly working on getting this GDC build done. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. As I said, no alpha this week. I may sneak one out during the week or next Friday for those of you who are interested to help me last minute bug hunt for the demo scene that I'm going to be taking to GDC. So so keep an eye out for that. I will mention it either on the subreddit if it happens or in next week's devlog. I hope you all have as I said, a wonderful week. Talk to you soon. Peace.